Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Maris Hayashi, a member of NASIG's Continuing Education Committee. Welcome to the webinar entitled Asking for More, What Works in Academic Library Acquisitions Negotiations. Before we start, I have some CEC announcements. After the webinar, you'll be receiving a link to a short evaluation form and a link to the recording. I'll add a few links in the chat where you can find the webinar archive on NASIG's webpage and archived recordings on YouTube. And as we look towards 2026, our first webinar of the year will be on February 6th, Predatory Publishing and Global Scholarly Communications. We'll get started on the webinar. Please add any questions you have in the Q&A and they will be addressed after the presentation. But for now, I'm going to pass things over to Amy Pham and Jill Grogg, our presenters for today's webinar. Take it away.
Thank you, Maris. I'm going to share my screen and make sure I'm on the right one for you all. Can someone confirm that they can see some slides?
Yep, we can see you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you to the NASIG Continuing Education Committee for inviting me and Jill today to speak to you. My name is Amy Pham, and I've been negotiating e-resources for about 7 years now, first at a consortium, SCELC, and now at the University of San Diego. At USD, I'm the sole librarian responsible for continuing resources licensing.
My name is Jill Grogg, and I've been doing e-resources negotiation for over 22 years, both at individual large academic libraries and for the past 10 years at Lyrasis for diverse groups of libraries. For those of you who may not know, Lyrasis is a nonprofit 501c3 consortium or membership organization of galleries, libraries, archives, and museums.
Today, we're going to talk about negotiation basics and take a quick look at gender and race in negotiations. Most of this presentation is going to be informed by an interview study I conducted last year that revealed common successful negotiation strategies that Jill and I will cover in depth. Then we're going to share some additional resources for e-resources negotiation and try our best to leave plenty of time for Q&A.
So we wanted to start out by saying, like it or not, you are a negotiator. Everyone negotiates something every day. You may not think of yourself as a negotiator. It may not be part of your core identity, but negotiation is ubiquitous, even if we don't think of what we are doing as negotiation. You know, whether you're negotiating $1 million deal with a big corporation, you're buying a new car, or you're trying to get your 6-year-old to eat more green beans, that's all negotiation. And negotiation has many parallel disciplines: conflict resolution, communication, mediation, and psychology. Historically, the prominent people in the field of negotiation were privileged, straight, white, and male. So you're going to see a lot of businessmen and academics at places like Wharton and Harvard. But learning how to negotiate creatively, empathetically, and with intentionality is an essential skill in all of your relationships, both inside and outside the workplace. So now we're just going to briefly talk about some negotiation basics, and we're going to start out with a definition of what is negotiation. And throughout the presentation, you'll see us reference some books and some seminal text. All of that will be included in our resources that we share at the end. This is a simple and clear definition from Michael Wheeler of Harvard Business School, author of The Art of Negotiation: How to Improvise in a Chaotic World. And you can see there that is negotiation refers to back and forth communication, and I want to emphasize communication, designed to reach an agreement when you and the other side have some interests that are shared and opposed. If they were only shared, it wouldn't be a negotiation. There has to be a sense of opposition there. And so next we're going to talk about what is the desired outcome of negotiation. The critical concept in this particular definition is the balance and recognition of both competing and aligned interests. Again, if all of your interests aligned, you wouldn't have to negotiate. But what we see is I want to buy your product, you want to sell it to me, but I want to pay less for it and you want me to pay more for it. So therefore we have a negotiation. It's obviously usually more nuanced than that, but you get the general picture. And ultimately, negotiation is a social exchange between two or more parties. I do want to point out here that we librarians often think of negotiation as a quote, us versus them, and sometimes it certainly feels that way. That's not really productive during a negotiation itself. We have to recognize that vendors and publishers have their own goals and values and profit margins, which are not necessarily evil, just different than our goals. And then last, we're just going to briefly talk about the types of e-resources negotiations that Amy and I will be discussing throughout the rest of the presentation today. You have pricing negotiation, which is, again, I want to pay less, you want me to pay more. And then obviously you have contract negotiations where you're trying to get the best possible terms of use and other elements in a license that are beneficial for your parent organization and your users.
Women don't ask. They don't ask for raises and promotions and better job opportunities. They don't ask for recognition for the good work they do, and they don't ask for more help at home. The library industry has been predominantly women and predominantly white women for over 30 years, and negotiation has become increasingly recognized as a necessary skill for librarians in that time. The quote that I just read to you was the opening lines to Women Don't Ask, Negotiation and the Gender Divide by Linda Babcock and Sarah LaShaver, published originally in 2003. This book really brought the topic of gender and negotiations into mainstream consciousness and addressed all of these sociological factors impacting women in negotiations, like how gender expectations play a role in negotiation outcomes, including expectations around how women should act, what people think a woman's purpose in society is, and how things like internalized sexism can affect a negotiation. Babcock and LaShaver found that negative negotiation experiences for women are international and intergenerational. So no matter where you are in time and space, if you present as a woman, you probably have or will have a negative negotiation experience. And 20 years later, things are slowly changing, but circumstances largely remain the same. More recent research focuses on race in negotiations, as well as the intersection of gender and race. And all of these studies have found that negotiators who are women or who are non-white experience similar results. We experience backlash when we don't conform to behavior expected of our gender or race. We experience something called stereotype threat, or the fear that we're going to prove the stereotype about our gender or race with our actions. We can often be excluded from really key professional social networks, and we don't experience the same outcomes as white or male negotiators, even when asking directly for similar results. But gender and race are really complicated to study. There can often be external factors that impact a negotiation in addition to or in spite of someone's gender or race. And one study found that women of color may outperform white women in negotiations, but still experience negative side effects that impact their negotiation results. Most importantly, if you are a woman or a woman of color on this call, that doesn't automatically mean you'll experience bad negotiation outcomes or that you're a bad negotiator. Context really matters in a negotiation. So studies have found that even one negotiation makes a difference in your experience level. And the more you negotiate, the better and more comfortable you'll get in negotiating. It's exactly like a muscle. If a negotiation requires collaboration, the outcome will probably be better if a woman is involved. The size of your professional network is also important. Having a large professional network will provide you with professional protection and insider knowledge. And finally, women typically experience less backlash when we're negotiating on behalf of others, like our institution. So a couple of years ago, I decided I wanted to learn more about the impact of gender and race on negotiations. When I was at Skelk, I always negotiated as part of a team. And even when a negotiating was frustrating, it rarely felt combative. Then when I came to USC and I became responsible for negotiating continuing resources on my own, that experience changed. Suddenly it was just me, sometimes in a room or a Zoom call with like 3 white men who were all taller than me off camera. And it was really intimidating. I had never felt that when I was negotiating for Skelk. And I just thought, is this what it's like for all librarians? Am I having a bad time because of my gender or because of my race? And so I conducted a study where I interviewed other librarians to find out about their experiences negotiating. In the study, I wanted to identify shared negotiation trends and approaches amongst librarians negotiating for e-resources, whether there was a connection between negotiation approach and someone's gender or race, and whether there really was an impact on negotiation outcomes dependent on that person's gender or race. And what I found out is I need more research to identify a connection between gender, race, and negotiation approaches and outcomes. That topic really deserves its own focus study to produce clear results. But interestingly enough, regardless of gender or race, I found that participants were actually generally successful negotiators, and they agreed on a few common approaches to ensure success in their negotiations. Success in e-resource negotiations really means getting the best deal for the best price and the best license terms. And there were 3 common approaches that came out of my study that help with success. First, you want to ground your negotiation in data. Second, you want to build collaborative and communicative relationships with your vendor reps. And third, you want to figure out what works for you and your institution and really leverage those features during a negotiation. So Jill and I are going to talk about each of these 3 approaches, and we'll provide examples of how we've applied them in our own negotiations. I'm going to start with the data-driven approach. So the number one thing I learned from my study is to always be prepared before and during a negotiation with data. And there is no such thing as too much data. So this is a long but not comprehensive list of data points that participants mentioned during their interviews. Some data points you're probably already familiar with collecting, like cost per use. And then there are others that I thought were really interesting that I hadn't considered before, like keeping track of a vendor's fiscal year, because you're more likely to get a good deal when fiscal years or business quarters are ending. So gathering all that data might seem overwhelming, but I have found that normalizing data gathering as part of my workflows has really helped me to gather data consistently throughout the year instead of in one big rush. So these are some things I've done at the past 2 years at my institution that have really helped improve my negotiation experiences. I've established a renewal dashboard to track historical pricing and project future pricing. This helped me to start proactively prepare for renewals months in advance instead of at the point of receiving a renewal notification. I started to build dossiers on the vendors we work with at my library. So it's basically a running meeting notes doc for every vendor I meet with. It's very casual. And I include information I learn about the vendor rep as well as my experience with them as I'm meeting them. So the next time I meet with them, I can refer back to my notes and remember maybe they're based out of New Jersey and they have a really cute dog. So I ask them about that. Or every time I meet with this vendor, they blindside me by inviting 2 other people I've never met before. And so I want to make sure to be prepared. I also gather what I'm going to call, for the purposes of this webinar, interrogation data. I really wasn't sure how to summarize this kind of data, but basically it's data that will help you ask questions about the resource you're renewing. So finding information on competing products, you can say, this other product does something pretty similar. What makes yours special? I like to ask or find product roadmaps so I know what the future direction of the resource is, why they're claiming they're going to increase my renewal for the year based on that direction. And, is the product going in a direction that our library can continue to support? And I also look at product performance. How is the resource being used at my institution and at other institutions? So I'm pretty bad at this point, but I do try to protect my time with internal renewal price thresholds. I don't personally have an exact number set, but if a renewal proposal comes in and the increase is something like $300, I might say that's good enough and renew without negotiating, but it depends on what the ultimate increase is. And finally, I partner with our subject specialist to get qualitative feedback on a resource. Sometimes the price isn't the point, it's how it's being used. I'm going to pass it off to Jill now to give her own example of applying data.
Sorry, I muted myself so I wouldn't cough into the microphone. So I'm going to present a little bit of a consortial angle because that's where I've been for the past 10 years. And I'm going to use our Springer Nature group. We recently transitioned in 2024 from a traditional subscription model for about 125 to 130 libraries of all different types and sizes. We have research ones all the way down to community colleges in our group. And we transitioned that group in 2024 from that traditional subscription model to a read and publish model. That necessitated us doing a tremendous amount of data analysis. And I've got some examples here for you of the types of data analysis that we did. We looked at the publishing history and output for the past 3 years prior to 2024 for every single participant and looked at who is publishing, who is primarily a read institution, who's primarily a publishing institution. And we're able to look across also the historical spend across 125 libraries to ensure equity as well. When we're negotiating, that's something unique that a consortia can do. It can look across different libraries, see what peer institutions are paying and whether or not those are equitable, and that's a negotiation point as well. Consortia, we also survey our participants about the acceptable increases that they can absorb. We did a survey of all of our members. We have a little over 1,000 members, and we did a survey in the spring about budgets. Due to our current economic and socio-political climate, folks are pretty nervous right now. So we did a survey to determine the budgetary outlook that they knew at that point in the April-May timeframe. And then we've been able to turn around and use that survey data because we had more than 250 responses, which is a significant response rate for 1,000 members of all different types and sizes. And we were able to turn around and use that survey data in successful negotiations this year with different publishers to say, our libraries, we've surveyed them, we have this data, they cannot absorb anything more than X percentage increase for this year. So that's just an example at the consortial level of how we use data and how it's a unique way to look at it because we have a broader view, I guess I would say, across different types of libraries and participating institutions.
Now we're going to talk about the second in the triad of successful negotiation approaches, building good relationships and communication. One of the findings that came out of my study is that a lack of cooperation is the most common barrier to successful negotiation for librarians. In the context of the study, this referred to a lack of cooperation from vendors, but I would argue that mutual cooperation is beneficial to both parties. As Jill mentioned earlier, an us versus them mindset is not productive. Plus, there are several benefits to building long-lasting professional relationships with your vendor reps. It's easier to work with someone who knows you and your organization. I spoke to librarians who talked about how reps will go out of their way to make a good deal happen for their library on the basis of their relationship, and I can attest to that. We're also a small community, even though library sales can be a big business. You'll most likely end up working with a lot of the same reps at different companies. And ultimately, what kind of relationship you decide to build is up to you. Some people keep it strictly professional, and sometimes a rep can become the friend you made at work. What's really important is deciding where that line is for you.
So now we're going to talk about communication and how important communication is to negotiation because it's impossible to negotiate without communicating. And determining the kind of communication you will be using in any given negotiation is really critical. Thinking about whether or not it's face to face or digital, you might have a different communication style. But also critical is understanding and interpreting the persons with whom you will be negotiating. One of the reasons that different people can arrive at different conclusions based upon the same message is the imposition of what's called noise on message reception in communication theory. Noise can be literal sounds, as anyone who has ever tried to carry on a conversation with an adult while a 2-year-old screams in the background. But more broadly defined, the concept refers to any stimulus that gets between the message and its intended receiver. Noise could result from from the appearance of the messenger. Maybe you've got some spinach in your teeth and that's distracting. Noise can be hunger or exhaustion. It could be a preconceived belief, a strong emotion, or an entrenched value system for that matter. It could be apathy, mental illness, a desire to win at all cost, or any number of impediments to the message getting from the sender to the receiver in the pristine fashion that the sender intended. Noise, however, is not an impenetrable wall to effective communication, and one of the reasons for this is feedback. Let's pretend you and I are walking along a sidewalk in a busy city on a windy day. I'm a sales representative from a major publisher, and you are a librarian who decides what product, if any, your library might license from me. It's my job to make you want to do business with my company, and the bigger the business, the better it's going to be for me. You, however, at this moment are not an ideal receptor for my message. You had a big fight with your spouse last night. You overslept and missed breakfast, and now it is past noon and you haven't eaten all day. You are hungry, tired, sad, and grumpy. On top of all of this, the racket from the traffic and our fellow pedestrians is loud and distracting. Noise of all sorts abounds. My only hope for success in our business dealing on this day at this time lies in maintaining and artfully using something called the feedback loop, which binds our communication and through the skillful use of this feedback reduces or eliminates the noise which distracts you from my message as I am intending you to receive it. Let's apply the artful use of the feedback loop. A skilled sales representative might gauge the mood and reaction of the librarian, verbal and nonverbal, and discontinue that sales pitch. He might invite the librarian to lunch and veer the conversation towards something common or maybe something personal, perhaps commiserating about high housing prices or other common ground, the weather. Having connected on a bit more personal or common ground level and helped elevate the librarian's mood, or at least reduce that noise, he then can continue the sales pitch. A savvy negotiator understands that keeping the feedback loop vital enhances one's chance for success. And I want to emphasize here, you can be personal with someone without divulging personal details. And I think Amy had a comment on this one too.
Oh, yes. If we have time, I guess I can talk a little bit about it. I was just going to say, in addition to what Jill was saying, that you can be personal without divulging personal details. Sometimes I think we feel an obligation to return or match the other person's energy or their conversational connection. So, sales rep you're speaking to might try to be personal and say, I have a family life, or I just bought a house, or whatever other personal information they want to share, and you do not have to do the same. You can connect to another person by talking about the weather, by talking about recent news in your city, by being vague about personal details, and instead veering the conversation towards maybe a shared hobby that you have with that vendor. There's no obligation to be personal about your own life.
There is evidence, however, again, emphasizing you can be personal and connect personally without divulging personal details. But there is absolute evidence that building rapport is crucial for good communication and thus good negotiation. And as you see here, subjects who engage in 5 minutes of small talk over the phone prior to participating in a negotiation simulation via email were 4 times more likely to reach a beneficial agreement and feel good about the process than subjects who didn't try to build rapport first. And that building of rapport is critical to that relationship building aspect.
If you are in the audience right now and you're thinking, I hate working with vendors, how do I approach this relationship building and communication and rapport building if I'm not comfortable building any kind of relationship with vendors? So I have found that quantifying my relationships with our vendors, as psychotic as that sounds, has helped me to separate the professional from the personal. Last year, I added up every vendor meeting in my calendar and summarized it in a chart, which is what you're seeing here. I also included product webinars and demos because that is time I spent investing in learning more about that vendor and their product. And I did all this as part of an internal report I had to give, but by quantifying how much time I spent with each vendor, I was able to better direct my relationship building efforts. I took this chart and I compared how much time I spent with each vendor to the total amount of money our library spent with that vendor. And I asked myself, did I spend too much time with any vendors, despite the fact we don't license anything with them? Are there any vendors I didn't check in with at all? And then I targeted my efforts towards reaching out to vendors I hadn't had a lot of contact with over the year, but with whom we license quite a bit. And in my meetings with vendors, I'll typically list my talking points ahead of time, and I'll make sure the vendor has space to ask me for information that would be helpful for them, so they feel that they get a benefit out of our meeting.
One element of relationship building and building rapport, etc., is you want to make sure and do something called avoid the reciprocity trap. Richard Schell, who is the author of Bargaining for Advantage, Negotiation Strategies for Reasonable People, describes this as people who make small concessions and then ask for much bigger ones in return. So, for example, your library administration might say, we've got the air conditioning in the reference room fixed, so it's no longer 87 degrees in there. In return, we think it would only be fair for the reference librarians to staff the reference desk until 1 a.m. instead of closing at 10 p.m. That sound good? That's the reciprocity trap. In vendor and publisher relationship building, it's important to keep any concessions on both sides equitable. As women, it's often expected for us to be accommodating, so we need to be particularly vigilant about not falling into the reciprocity trap. Maintaining healthy relationships with our vendors means maintaining equity and healthy boundaries. Amy and I have talked about building rapport and being personal without divulging personal, but we do want to remind everyone this is business.
Finally, the third strategy, helping us to ensure success, which is kind of a misnomer because you can't really ensure success, but you can prioritize it. I summarize this approach from my study as being success-driven. Basically, librarians spoke about overcoming barriers to success regardless of what that barrier was, whether it was lack of funding or lack of vendor cooperation or lack of administrative buy-in. What success looks like is different for every library, but whatever unique situation your library is in, leverage that situation to your advantage. The librarians I spoke with cited all kinds of different examples of leverage that they use in a negotiation, including their institution's prestigious status, their library's membership in a consortium, if their library was dealing with funding issues and what library isn't, that became a negotiation point. If your library can't afford a resource, you might be forced to cancel it.
Now we're going to talk about some core concepts within negotiation and negotiation theory. The first of those is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or BATNA. Every one of the text and other resources we're going to share with you is going to talk about the BATNA. You always need the BATNA, and your BATNA can be improved with planning. We've already talked about ways to do that. You can have alternative products, you can have alternative access models. Perhaps if the cost is too high for the big deal, then you move into a one-by-one purchase model or a token model. Your BATNA is only improved by creating stakeholder buy-in and support for change. So reaching out to the departments that use these resources, reaching out to other people within the library, as well as other external entities on campus. The ZOPA, or the Zone of Possible Agreement, is the range in a negotiation in which two or more parties can find common ground. So, for example, the vendor's ZOPA is 3 to 7% increase. The library's is 3 to 4% increase. Therefore, the ZOPA is 3 to 4%. Of course, we don't always know the other person's ZOPA, which can cause ambiguity, but you can do your research through data and all the items that Amy has already talked about to know as much as you possibly can. Thinking about the ZOPA leads us to a seminal question in all negotiations. Should you be the one to put the first offer on the table? I would argue that when you have a pretty good idea of what the zone of possible agreement looks like, you want to be the first to put the number on the table. And you want to put the number at your preferred end of the ZOPA. However, when you have no idea what the ZOPA is, it's not wise to make the first offer. Instead, be the first person to frame the negotiation.
Framing is also a really good relationship building method and a great way to collect data before a negotiation. So I'm really glad that Jill brought up that alternative. When I want to frame a negotiation, I call for an initial discussion with the vendor where we both reflect over the past year for our organizations, and then we share our concerns about the upcoming renewal. Then we both know what the other party is working towards, and we can agree on set information that we're both going to bring to the next meeting, where the negotiation might start in earnest. If a vendor tries to commandeer the framing meeting, I ask them to just email me what they're asking for, and I'll let them know I'll review offline, and we'll talk about it seriously at our first serious negotiation meeting.
So we need to do some competitive intelligence to have the best BATNA that we can. And so I'm not going to go through each one of these separately, but you'll have this presentation to refer back to. You know, Amy's already talked about some of this previously. What kinds of deals have we successfully negotiated in the past with a particular vendor? What other vendors that serve similar markets and offer similar products? What other consortia deals are currently in place that may be helpful for us to reveal? Maybe we need to reach out to colleagues at our consortia. If not in a consortium, reach out to other e-resources librarians through your professional network, as well as build your internal stakeholder groups. That's another reason why it's so important to build those professional networking groups for yourself. One thing I want to particularly point out is to identify deadlines. This can be a point for negotiation for lower prices, but make sure these deadlines are real and not false and being used to force poor terms and prices. All of these elements of competitive business intelligence, doing your homework, doing your research, go into creating a successful BATNA.
The first time I learned about BATNA, I thought, I've never thought about a negotiation this way. Where do we even start? And I personally keep my BATNA considerations pretty simple most of the time. I have what I'm showing you here, which is this working sheet. It's literally called a working spreadsheet. And it's just a spreadsheet where I map renewal proposals and possibilities. And I noodle around with the percentages to figure out what final price point might be acceptable if I can't get a flat renewal. Because, you know, a flat renewal is ideal, but sometimes we live in a fantasy world. And there's not much on this. There's no structure to it. Literally just a bunch of numbers and percentages. We're actually at the end here. We've been a little too judicious with our anecdotes.
Well, we can share more anecdotes if
We have
necessary.
so many.
We have so many. I think the ultimate thing to think about here is negotiation requires serious self-reflection. You've got to know yourself. No one is born being an expert negotiator. Amy mentioned earlier in the presentation that even doing one negotiation drastically improves your success rate for the next negotiation. It's a skill like anything else. But it's important to reflect on what your strengths, weaknesses, and preferences or styles as a negotiator are. Very important. And there are tools out there that will help you do this. There's one, I've done a presentation in the past with my colleague Beth Ashmore, who now works at North Carolina State, where we lead people through a free version of the Strengths Finder assessment. You can find this free online. It was originally a personal development tool developed by Gallup Education, which provides an individual with their top 5 strengths. And there are 34 different strength themes, and they're divided into 4 domains: strategic thinking, relationship building, influencing, and executing. It's now called Clifton Strengths. And again, the Gallup version is that version is not free, but there are free versions available. And it's a way for you to do some self reflection about where your strengths and weaknesses are. Another way to look at your preferences or styles as a negotiation is this book, Bargaining for Advantage: Negotiation Strengths for Reasonable People by Richard Schell. So, Schell is the director of the Wharton Executive Negotiation Workshop and discusses 5 different bargaining styles and leads readers through a self-assessment to determine their preferred styles. It's very helpful, like StrengthsFinder, for self-assessment. And now I think we are going to have some personal examples about maybe strengths that seem like weaknesses, and I think Amy's going to start this one.
Yes, thank you, Jill. Throughout this presentation, we've talked about how to take advantage of different aspects of a negotiation to build a successful negotiation, sort of framed on the premise that society believes that the way we present ourselves and our gender and our race are actual weaknesses in negotiation. But to close out our presentation, both Jill and I are going to share how we've leveraged our own personal identities into negotiation strengths. Because, like I said earlier, regardless of gender or race, librarians really know how to be successful negotiators. And so you should embrace that part of yourself that people think is a weakness and surprise them. So I'm an Asian American woman from Southern California, and people initially expect me to be unassuming and friendly. And I am. I really like being friendly and unassuming. It helps me to build relationships. I actually really enjoy interacting with vendors. I hope that doesn't make me a pariah in this webinar. And then it sort of takes them by surprise when I'm also totally prepared with all of the data that would flip their negotiation.
So, in a similar vein, if it's not evident, I live in the southern United States. I have a very thick southern accent. People comment on it all the time. And I have actually used that to my advantage over many negotiations. Sort of in a similar way to Amy, people assume that I'm just nice, hospitable, very accommodating, perhaps even not as bright as other people. If you look at media, even down to what your children engage with, whenever they want someone, a cartoon character on SpongeBob or somewhere else, or The Simpsons, for example, whenever they want someone to appear not that bright, they give them a Southern accent. And that has permeated even my own, identity to a certain extent. And it's certainly, I have friends who have decided to get rid of their Southern accents so that they don't have to confront that particular stereotype. But I've decided to weaponize it against the vendors with whom I work, and I have found it to be actually fairly successful. They don't quite know what to do when I turn around and end up having to play hardball. And so, even if you have those types of things that you might think of as a weakness, you can turn those into a strength. And again, this self reflection is very important in negotiation and determining what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And the bargaining for advantage actually leads you through an exercise wherein you can find out what your particular preferred styles are and where you might need to do a little bit more work.
Yes, and in addition to Jill's recommendation for bargaining for advantage, I would say that any of these resources, the key takeaway is that you should embrace your particular negotiation style. If you are someone who is really competitive and you want to win at all costs, lean into it, maybe temper it a little bit to make sure you don't destroy any relationships. But if you're someone who's not like that, you're more typically you want to avoid being in a conflict, that's okay too. I spoke to librarians who refuse to hold any negotiations over a call or over Zoom because they felt like they caved too easily. So they held all of their negotiations via email, and it worked for them. All right, so we are going to drop a link to more resources in the chat. I believe Jill has it available for you. And
Yes.
as she's getting that into the chat, we've got time with each other still. I want to highlight just a couple from the list. It's going to be a pretty extensive list. First, the O'Neill curriculum, the Open Negotiation Education for Academic Libraries program was released in the past couple of years. It's an open educational resource that provides asynchronous negotiation education. It's a really great resource for more formal training, which often we lack in our positions. I'm halfway through the curriculum myself, and I have found it to be a really great way to frame and structure how I think about negotiation, especially for license agreements, which Jill and I didn't cover much today, but which the O'Neill curriculum will. And then Spark hosts these vendor-specific negotiation discussions where librarians can share their experiences negotiating with specific vendors or on specific topics. These sessions aren't recorded, so I highly recommend attending them live. I always learn so much in the chat and from other people sharing their experiences. And now we're going to open up for Q&A. First, I want to thank NASIG again for inviting us to speak today. Jill and I love talking about this topic and hearing from others about how their negotiation experiences were going. I want to thank you, Shoyan and Maris, for coordinating and introducing us. So I'm going to, oh, and of course, you can contact either of us or both of us anytime at our emails. I'll leave this up for a few minutes and then I will unshare my screen so that we can all see each other. And if there are no questions in the Q&A, Jill and I will keep talking about our own, about our own experiences.
Yeah, that would be great. But I don't see anything in the Q&A yet. Although we did have a question from one of our CEC colleagues who asked, let's see, how do you handle when those extra vendors pop on screen? Do you have backup attendees on deck for specific vendors in those cases?
I think that's an excellent question. And the answer to that is yes. Some of that is experience. For example, if I have had difficult conversations with a vendor or publisher in the past, then I always ask someone else to attend with me so that we have two people interpreting what's happening with the negotiation. Part of that's relationship building, but we always have more difficult vendors that we have to deal with. So but that's a privilege that I have because I have a team of people that I work with. If you're at an institution where you're the only person doing the negotiation, you may not have that privilege. So with certain vendors that I've had, I won't go so far as to say contentious. Yes, I will. I will go so far to say is contentious.
It's okay. It's all a part of business.
Right.
It happens.
Negotiation in the past. I generally, if we're having a Zoom call or in person, if possible, ask someone else to be there with me. But again, that's a privilege because I work with a team of people at Lyrasis. So, Amy, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I agree with Jill. This was a great question, and I do something pretty similar to her. So I said earlier that I'm the sole librarian negotiating for continuing resources. So I don't necessarily have a team of people who can join me who have the same amount of knowledge around negotiating. But what I believe in and what I learned from the participants of my study is strength in numbers. So I have a couple of staff members who help me with different aspects of continuing resources. I'm trying to train them up in different areas. And sometimes I'll just invite them. They are not going to say anything, but they'll take notes for me. I can check in with them after and say, what was your impression of what happened? And it's the dynamic changes a little bit when you have a group who is attending representing your institution. I'll also sometimes invite my department head to join us if it's going to be a negotiation where I'm not confident about how my interaction with that vendor will go, or I think that the vendor will talk about something, where the vendor will bring multiple people and talk about something that I won't have as much institutional knowledge to respond to. And then I also like to involve our liaisons for very subject specific resources. So if we are negotiating for a business resource, I don't know how that resource is being used or what it is most of the time. I like know a very vague sense of it, and I'll invite our business librarian because then she'll ask a lot of questions about the resource, bring up issues with it, and that really helps.
Yeah, I think that's important. But I had vendors and publishers when I was at individual institutions or even at Lyrasis talking to me about the functionality and the content of the databases. And I'm like, hold up, I don't use these things. I just license them. So bringing in the subject experts is a great idea because they can help you discover data and ask the questions that you might not have considered.
And you don't have to do it all in one meeting. If a vendor starts asking you things that you don't know how to answer, you can say, I will find out more about that and get back to you, and we'll schedule a follow-up.
I think having other folks there too depends on the goal of the meeting itself, which is if it's just touching base at a conference because you both happen to be there face to face, even if it's a vendor that I've had difficult negotiations with in the past, I might not bring somebody else. So it's important to think about the type of communication that you're going to be doing. What are you actually, what's the goal of this meeting? Is it just to say, hi, how's everything going? Or are we talking very significantly about something?
I saw a question come into Q&A, and I saw that James posted one in the chat as well, but I'm going to come back to it. Elizabeth Farrell asked, do you have a customer relationship management tool that you recommend? And I will say we do not. Our institution migrated to Alma last year, and I have desperately been trying to turn Alma into our ERM with varying success. So what I have right now is Alma for contact info, um, a bunch of Google Docs of every single vendor we work with when I meet with them, and my brain. It's not great. I think a lot about succession training for my position, and I'm working on it, but no one tool right now. So if anyone has something in that they use at the institution they really like, please share in the chat.
We're at Lyrasis, we do have a CRM. We just migrated from a Microsoft product to Salesforce.
Hmm.
And then there's another additional layer on top of Salesforce. I will tell you, and I'm going to sound like the old lady here, but I've been doing this e-resource management before it was even called e-resources. I was doing it when I was a serials librarian. I was the first e-resources librarian at the University of Alabama, and it was just me, and then we ended up growing it to a team. What I have learned about electronic resources is this: there is no, as Amy said, one tool that I have ever found that's going to allow you to manage it effectively. I remember them coming out with the very first ERMs that were associated with the traditional ILSs, and they were clunky and terrible, and we ended up using spreadsheets and Google Docs and everything else. Even at Lyrasis, where we have something like Salesforce, and we're a bit different because we're negotiating on behalf of groups of libraries, we still use spreadsheets and Google Docs and other types of tools like that. So I have finally just accepted maybe this will happen before I retire, but there is not one out there that can handle the ambiguities and the messiness of e-resources that I have ever encountered. If you have one, let me know because I'd love to see it. But it is, with any tool I've worked with, and I've worked with a bunch, it is it's a mixture of spreadsheets, Google Docs, the system itself, etc., etc. If that
Sometimes
makes
I
you feel better. I always feel like e-resource librarians, when they get together, it's like a support group. Like, hi, my name is Jill. I'm an electronic resources librarian.
It's so true. Um, Sometimes I think about going back to a Rolodex. I was just thinking about that right now. Something so simple. I can tactily flip through all of the contacts I have and look at like a little written sheet about that person, and then I can burn it if anyone ever finds it.
That's
So James Rhodes asked us to describe a negotiation we're most proud of. I don't know. That's a hard one. I put it off because I had to think about it.
I feel really, I mean, I've had a number over the years, but I'm going to talk about the one that's most recent. It was this Springer Nature that was 125 to 130 libraries of all different types and sizes to come together for a consensus to move from a traditional subscription model to a read and publish offer. And we were able to do that with complete cost neutrality. It didn't cost them anything more to do a read and publish than it would have to maintain their subscriptions in that more traditional model. And so that cost neutrality was critical. So even if you were a read institution that doesn't do much publishing, you were still able to maintain your access to the content. And then if you did have a couple of articles being published a year in any of the eligible journals within Springer, then you would have those costs covered, and we were able to show that. The other thing that was very wonderful about this is we were able to include a number of minority serving institutions and historically black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, in this offer for a very low cost or low barrier of participation, which is something that at Lyrasis we're very wary of doing things that are inequitable. We want to make sure there's equity across this and looking at the different participants and what equity means for those participants. So that's something that I was very, and it took us a year. Obviously, and we had a lot of relationship and community building within the participant group itself, as well as any number of different conversations back and forth with Springer Nature. It was extremely data driven. We were looking at Open Alex, if you're familiar with that resource. We were looking at publishing data there and not only relying on the data that Springer Nature was giving us about publishing history. We went out and did our own investigation to make sure. I don't think they were being nefarious or anything like that, but we found some discrepancies. And we're still in this process, and it's a learning process. I'm not saying that transformative agreements are the end all be all. I don't think they are. I don't like the word transformative. I think the word transitional is much better. We may transition to something else, but that's one recently where we have schools, this is their very first read and publish that they are participating in. They don't have the bandwidth or staff capacity to negotiate these on their own, and they were able to participate with us in this large group. So that's my example.
I want to give a shout out to Jill's presentation at NASIG last year, the NASIG conference, where she did a whole presentation with, it was a Springer Nature group, right? On the very transformative agreement, well, the open access publishing agreement deal that she's speaking about now. And I also want to give a quick plug for myself. At ERNL, I'm doing a poster presentation on data discrepancies in negotiating transformative agreements. Like Jill was saying, when you do your own research, you start to see the holes in bibliometrics. And then for my own example, I don't know. I don't often think about how proud I am of a negotiation. Mostly I'm delighted it's over and that and that I have succeeded or not. But I will say this past year, really 2 years, I've worked very closely with one of our biggest continuing resources vendors. I've actually, yes, one of our biggest continuing resources vendors. I just through, typical assessment of our single title journal acquisitions, I discovered that there was one particular vendor that we licensed from the most, and they represented a huge bulk of our funding on journals. But because we were licensing single title from them, we weren't experiencing any of the benefits of a package deal, like capped increases, and we were paying a very high amount every single year. So I brought this up to them, and we worked to find avenues that we could transform all of the funding for these single title resources into a package that we could then leverage into a transformative agreement. So it took, like Jill was saying, it took so much data. We had, when we started to get serious about it, we had bi-weekly meetings to share the information we had both gathered on both sides and ask questions about that data. And then at the end, ultimately, we weren't able to commit to an agreement because there was too much additional cost. But I'm really proud of the way we were able to build I was able to build a relationship with this vendor, how much effort we both put into those negotiations. And then we did agree on not a package exactly, but sort of a cap on the renewal increases. So at the end of the day, I'm still saving our library a bunch of money. So yeah, And then we've agreed to continue working towards that transformative agreement aspect.
Great. Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A and any other anything in the chat.
There was one comment from Rochelle that said, thanks for addressing the personal sharing with
Oh,
vendors
here
and
we go.
relationship building. Really, it can be something as benign as talking about the weather each of you are having at that moment. Yes, you can build rapport without divulging your life history with someone. And if you're uncomfortable sharing personal details, that's perfectly fine. But learning how to have that small talk or building that rapport, it is an important part of negotiation.
Um, my partner is really great at that kind of shallow small talk, the surface level, not shallow, but surface level small talk where you reveal nothing about yourself. And he describes it as talking to a rideshare driver. So if you're someone who takes a lot of Ubers or Lyfts or, is able to make conversation with an Uber driver, you can do the same thing with a vendor. It's the exact same kind of conversation.
That's great. And my that's remind what my husband does, who hates small talks. He just asks the other person questions because
Yes.
people love to talk about themselves. So you can ask the other person questions, and then you don't have, and then it feels as if to them that you're, interested in them and as a person. Whether you are or not is irrelevant, but it's another tool. If you don't, I'm not great at small talk. I always feel uncomfortable in the back of an Uber. So that's one thing that he's kind of shared with me too, is just ask the other person questions.
And do medium talk, like Larry David says. Have you run across vendors that are slow with email responses, especially with license negotiations? And do you have any tips to share? Oh, God,
I,
this is too real.
I that's part of our daily life. I mean, I try not to do this, but when I was at UA, I could not get the person to respond to me. I mean, it was months and months and months. So you can always pull the nuclear option and contact their boss or somebody else. I'm very hesitant to do that. I think I've only done that once, and that was with this particular egregious example. Um, we do have problems with response rate. What we have done is now I don't know if this would be feasible, but again, this is a consortium example. Is we ended up with Springer Nature setting up monthly meetings where we would spend 30, 45 minutes each month going over any outstanding questions that we have. Maybe it could be a bi-monthly so that you're forcing them to have a face to face where you say, where are you on X, Y, and Z? And that has helped us with some. And I don't mean to call out Springer Nature in that way. We have other vendors that we have those, and they've been perfectly responsive. But that has been helpful. It was also a complex relationship or a complex offer, but that's another tactic that we've used.
Um, I agree with Jill here. I'll do the same thing if it's a vendor who I know we're about to enter into lengthy negotiations, and I will start to contact them myself like 6 months in advance. And sometimes I've never done a year, but I've only been at this job for 2 years. So, that could still happen in the future. 6 months in advance. And then I make sure that we always have a follow-up call scheduled, just making sure that they're accountable. For vendors who we don't have that kind of regular call scheduled with, I have found it's not exactly successful, but I have found that following up regularly via email, copying in other people at the company, so that they see that you have tried to contact whoever your contact is multiple times, and then keeping the receipts. If they get back to you 1 month before renewal is due, and they're like, these are the terms, and you have 2 weeks to respond, you can say, I've tried to reach you, you know, X amount of times. Here are all the emails where that happened. Um, we are not going like you have to give us more time to respond to this because that is reasonable. And I really lean into that idea of maintaining a reasonable and fair relationship with the vendor, especially if they want to continue working with you in the future and working with other librarians because, like I said earlier, we're a small community. People will talk.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Amy. I just had that the wonderful example. I just had to do that this summer where they wanted me to turn around with an agreement in a week and a half, and they had sat on it for 6 weeks. And I had to write back and say, oh, no, no. It's only fair, and that's avoiding the reciprocity trap to a certain extent there, where you have to maintain equal and healthy boundaries. And I had all of the emails, and I said, here's when you send it to us and we send it to you. We need more time, because they were going to cut folks off. And I said, So, that's a really great example, Amy.
Yes, I will say the worst they can do is cut off access. And I have told the vendor, do it and see how our users respond. We'll tell them it's because you're not cooperating.
Yes, and we will tell each of the participating libraries this is because the vendor is doing this. And I tell the vendor that I'm going to do that.
Yeah. We're at time. I didn't mean to end on such a contentious note. We really enjoy working with our
Yes,
vendor
yes, yes.
partners. And thank you to Virginia for sharing a vendor's perspective.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. Amy and Jill, much appreciate you being here today to share your presentation, challenging the women don't ask narrative. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to the attendees for joining us today. Please share your feedback with the CEC by filling out the evaluation form that you're going to be receiving. And I will be putting the links in the chat for the CEC NASIG webinars that we have on the archive and the YouTube channel. And of course, the upcoming webinar, February 4th, is Predatory Publishing and Global Scholarly Communications. I don't believe the registration info is up yet, but look for that in January. So thank you and have a great rest of the day. Happy holidays, and we'll see you all in 2026.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone.